Gordon, you had several years at OMB, looking specifically at defense and intelligence numbers. So could you give us just an overview of what we spend on defense and basically where the money goes?
Okay, thanks. I have said that I taught budget classes and master's level for many years, and I always started by saying budgets are policy. Because most people come to foreign affairs and what they're really interested in is what are the Chinese doing, what's happening in Ukraine, what are the Europeans up to, are we helping with the earthquake in Turkey, whatever. It's, no matter what of those things of policy that you're talking about, bottom line, they involve money. You got to have money to pay for them. You want to give, earthquake aid to Turkey, you better have the right authorities and the right money so you can give them the money. Right? Or send it to the aid organization so they can do the job. So you need to know how to deal with the aid organizations and so on. It really doesn't matter. And as we know with Ukraine, it's big budget. We're probably $60 billion in Ukraine. So there's a big budget piece. We couldn't support Ukraine without the resources in place to support Ukraine, without the authorities in place to support Ukraine. So it's the kind of boring stuff that people really, want to stick their fingers in the ears. I don't want to hear about that, right? Because a lot of people are numbers averse, but really, I went to OMB in part because I knew that where I would be sitting was right at the core of what would make policy possible. And that's what's in the budget. So defense is, one of those big categories of budget, and it's really hard for people to get their arms around how much we spend on defense. I'm going to work here number-wise from what the Biden administration sent up to the Congress for fiscal 24. Just for the sake of running a number, and the number for the Department of Defense is $842 billion. When I was at OMB in the mid-90s, and this is in real year dollars, the numbers were around $250 billion. So you can see in the long span of history where this has gone, it's just exponentially gone up. And as far as I know, there's only two reasons why defense budgets go down, right? One is because we end a war. Hello, we don't need so many troops. We don't need so much equipment. We can train less. We deploy less. There's a whole bunch of costs we don't have to spend, right? And two, the kind of work that the Concord Coalition and other people do is because there's constraints on the federal budget. In other words, outside of defense, somebody says, hey, we got to do something about federal spending. As we did with Graham-Redmond-Holligs in the mid-'80s, or the Budget Enforcement Act in 1990, or the Budget Control Act in 2011. All of those were ways of saying, hey, we think we're spending too much. We need to be able to contain that spending. And when you cut that political deal, you can only do it by including both defense and domestic spending in the mix. Because otherwise, if it's all domestic spending, Democrats aren't going to play. If it's all defense, Republicans aren't going to play, generally speaking, right? So, defense, how much that is always a difficult question to answer. $842 billion is a lot. It's about 55% of all of the discretionary spending in the federal budget. Right. So over half of discretionary spending. Okay, already I'm in la land. What the hell is discretionary spending? Right. Well, and discretionary spending is basically the operational programs and activities year by year that the Congress provides money for. Right. So every year they have to decide how much for defense, how much for HUD, how much for the Interior Department, and so on. There's this whole thing over there on the other side of the world called mandatory spending, which they don't appropriate every year. And that's the key difference. You get benefits through mandatory programs because you're eligible for them. You're poor, you're eligible for food stamps, you need a housing subsidy, whatever it is that your program you're eligible for, you get it because you're eligible, not because somebody had said, here's how much money for the program and we can only give you this little bit, right? So we set that kind of aside in thinking about the impact of defense because almost, not all, but almost all defense is discretionary spending. And it's over half of all of the discretionary spending we do in the federal government. And it's been kind of there for a very long time.